because kids and spouses kept walking in behind the scenes, they just decided they were going to have a 15-minute thing where everybody's going to introduce their kids. And the kids came in, and the kids didn't even know what dad does or mom does for a living. So they're now involved in that, being able to see these other people. And wow, dad does some work. And people were able to meet their children. And so that's a level of intimacy that we're not used to having in the corporate environment. It happens in Bring Your Kid to Work Day, right? But anyway, so I'm saying I think we're going to figure out ways to bridge the gap and get a little bit more intimate with each other, maybe more than we'd like, maybe a lot more than we like.
So when if I'm the manager in charge, one of the things that I like to do in every business I'm in, if I'm the leader or the manager of that individual or within the organizations we're involved with, we have this conversation, and it goes along the same lines you're saying, which is what I would ask somebody is personal, professional, family, community. What's important to you? What does success look like to you? And how do you prioritize this? And how do you see yourself in 1, 3, 5 years? And face to face, and I've never done it over a video screen, but maybe it works. But to me, it's a one-on-one, deeply personal conversation so that I know where somebody's at. And to your point, you learn a lot about that individual, but also you learn what drives them. What is the real motivator here? And sometimes they're saying what you think they want to, what they think you want to hear, as opposed to no. Well, how does that go to what you think is most important in your life? If you're talking about your career, but yet you're saying you live for your kids post 5 p.m. on the weekend, that's all I really care about. Well, gosh, okay, let's reposition this as an example. Those are the types of crucial conversations. Maybe those can happen like this. I just don't know if I can actually pull it off because I've just never done it before. Maybe that's my own inexperience.
Yeah. So I agree. And, I think there are some positives that come out of this thing. Like, for instance, you were talking earlier about getting in a room and hashing things out, because that's what we do. And, I know, because I was part of the Insight culture for a number of years. And one of the things that we're finding in our world is just like this conversation on Zoom, it's recorded, right? Sometimes we bring in an AI client, doesn't like the webinar space, but usually I would have an AI client that's taking notes. And it has trigger words that I can tell it so that it knows that's an important thing to follow up on later. So it builds me a summary.
There are wonderful things like that. I mean, the recording of conversations. I'm a whiteboard guy. I've got an entire wall of glass that I'm looking at here that's full from different businesses, different meetings, everything else. So, physically, again, we can do it with cameras, everything else. Again, it's just a different motion that we haven't done before.
Right. Okay, so any other questions before we let Tim go? You orbit, so Drew says you orbit in some power circles. What are you hearing about the life cycle of the pandemic, economic perspectives, that kind of thing?
Thanks, Drew. So the big thing that for the first time this morning, I started seeing something that we've been thinking about a lot about, which is what does coming out look like? Okay. So everybody's been talking doom and gloom, but if you look at China, Malaysia, Singapore, Korea, they're coming out of this, right? And they're coming out to the new normal. What nobody's really talking about in the U.S. is what does that look like? So let's use Arizona. If you've got some very rural communities, most of the people live in 4 metros, 90+%. Well, so if that's the case, what does coming out of this look like? And is it the same everywhere? And then let's use Austria as one of the very first examples where they're opening up small shops, no large shops, no restaurants. And they're saying, one person in the store at a time, here's the procedures, et cetera. Because I think that while this too will pass, nobody's spending enough time experimenting and coming out with potential ways that we get back to this new normal more rapidly. While a lot of businesses have been unaffected or mildly affected, I mean, the restaurant business obviously is the easiest one. They've been decimated. Well, how should they start thinking about gearing back up if it's possible? Is it one table every 10 feet? Is there another process? Do they have to wipe silverware and drinking glasses off every 10 minutes? What does that look like? That's a very specific example. But across the economy, we will come out of this. So how do we come out of it? And I just am seeing no political or, quite frankly, leadership on this, talking about what success is going to look like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months from now. Everything, we have a couple of medical companies we're involved with. The biostatisticians are all saying end of the month. One guy's calling April 15th, April 16th peak, okay, based upon where you're at. Most people are thinking that peak will be a psychological when we start going down. The second one is when their local community or their state is basically going towards zero. We know it's going to be several years, most likely, before we truly go to no cases. So what gets people comfortable? My brother did a Facebook poll. I'm not a big Facebook guy. And you have a third of the people that are totally freaked out. You have a third of the people that are pragmatic, and a third of people like virus, what virus? Not a big deal. Let's start hard charging. Well, how will that interact in terms of decision makers? If that third of folks that are paranoid are running a company, or they're a state or federal leader or mayor, well, gosh, that's going to be a very different response. Oh, by the way, all those positions are reasonable based upon your personal experience, how at risk you are, how at risk your family members, friends, etc. But what does this rollout look like? So I think as we get into this, we're going to see the criteria. I'm personally planning on kind of June 1, business as usual, whatever that new usual is. But like I think I mentioned earlier, cruise ship. I'm not going on any cruise ship anytime soon. And maybe if a bunch of criteria was hit, I would do it. But I mean, I go to Starbucks still 2 times a day, okay, in the drive-thru. I'm totally comfortable. I know other people that are not leaving their house because of this, okay? So how does this roll out? Even if we, quote-unquote, open in phases, what if half the population doesn't go with it?
Okay, good. We've got one more question here. What is your take on how this government stimulus will ultimately saddle our country and economy over the next 10 to 15 years?
If I was going to give my political diatribe, this $2 trillion bill that we just did was really the big airline, Boeing, big company bailout, because anybody that's tried to apply for the PPP funds has figured out it's an active guide. You got to jump through 7 hoops, and nobody I know has actually gotten a check yet, okay? So if you really needed the money really bad, you're already out of business, which a huge number of folks are already doing that. To this said, everything I know says there's only one way to get out of massive debt. That's 2 ways: inflation or devaluation of your currency. I think the positive side for the U.S. is it's dollar-denominated globe. And then the other piece is the fact that everybody else is in the same position. So in essence, I do think we're going to see a devaluation of the currency through inflation and some combination through the printing of money. But because it's happening globally, I don't think it's going to hit us worse than the next guy. But again, I am no monetary. I don't believe in MMT, if that's what you're thinking on the monetary theory side. I think this have a negative outcome. I will point out a friend of mine is in the trailer business, and he's got multiple factories across the U.S. where they could be at work. They went home because they're making more money on unemployment than they were in the business. They're making $27 an hour on unemployment in their particular location, and they're only making $22 an hour if they go to work. Well, gosh, what do you think they're doing? They're not making trailers, right?
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Much appreciated.
Yep. Thanks, Tim.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button.